chance. They make you wanna take it, take it, take it, take it, take it, take it. That's why make music. That's damnation. Damnation in France. That's Willamette. Warm cookies. If you're doing it professionally. WDM Nation Media. Think Tim. Tell me what you think about that. Wearing all the hats, curator of the undefined, speaker of the funk, driver of the car, the one who told you you could be what you want, whatever you want, you can be a star. We're talking to you. WDMN, Willa May, Big Tim, Damnation. We are talking to you. Peace and be well.
Welcome back to Why Make Music, a WDM Nation Media presentation. I'm Willa May. Last episode, we started with what sounded like a fairly simple question. Why do we root for the bad guy? Not just in movies, television, novels, or video games. But why thoughtful, intelligent people can find themselves emotionally invested in characters who lie, manipulate, steal, dominate, or destroy. What began as a conversation about storytelling quickly became something much larger. We explored the psychology of identification, why confidence often attracts us before morality does, how perspective shapes judgment, and why some villains become more memorable than the heroes trying to stop them. We discovered that emotional connection isn't the same thing as approval. More often than not, ... It's recognition. We recognize a frustration, an ambition, ... a wound, a loneliness, a desire to be understood, something familiar, ... even when we completely reject what that character eventually chooses to become. That was part one. Today, we're finishing the conversation. We're asking what happens after sympathy arrives, when understanding quietly becomes justification. Why audiences sometimes defend people who continue causing harm. What our favorite villains reveal about our own values, ambitions, fears, and blind spots. And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, ... Are the greatest villains really individuals? Or are they the systems, cultures, incentives, and everyday habits that quietly create them? Before we jump back in, today is also a special day here at WDM Nation Media. Alongside this episode, we're officially releasing If I Was Your Producer, Volume 13. For anyone keeping score, ... Yes, ... 13. Some people treat 13 like it's a warning. Around here, we don't believe in lucky or unlucky numbers. We believe in showing up, ... doing the work, learning, ... growing, and building one release at a time. So today marks another step forward for the catalogue, another chapter in the journey, ... and another reminder that creativity rewards consistency far more than superstition ever could. Next week's episode will be dedicated to Volume 13 itself, where we'll dive into the songs, the creative process, and the ideas behind the project. But today, ... our attention belongs somewhere else, because this second half moves beyond fiction. We're going to examine accountability, public figures, ... celebrity, social media, ... politics, family dynamics, ... institutions, and the uncomfortable possibility that our attraction to the villain may reveal as much about us as it does about the character standing on the screen. Because the real story was never just about the bad guy. It has always been about the audience. So let's continue. Understanding a bad person is not the same as approving of them. But the distance between those two positions can become surprisingly small. The moment an audience understands why someone behaves destructively, there is a temptation to treat that explanation as a defense. Pain becomes permission. Trauma becomes immunity. Loneliness becomes an excuse. A difficult childhood becomes a lifelong exemption from accountability. We begin with compassion, which is healthy, and somehow arrive at a place where every consequence feels unfair. This is one of the stranger effects of emotional attachment. The more invested we become in someone, the more creative we become on their behalf. We explain their motives. We reinterpret their words. We minimize the damage. We identify every person who provoked them, disappointed them, abandoned them, misunderstood them, or failed to recognize their potential. Before long, the central question is no longer what they did. The question becomes what everyone else did to make them do it. That shift matters because accountability disappears when responsibility is endlessly relocated. No one exists without influence. Every person has history, pressure, injury, disappointment, and context. Those things shape behavior, but they do not remove choice. Two people can experience similar wounds and make completely different decisions. One may seek help, another may seek revenge. One may interrupt the pattern, another may repeat it with greater force. The wound may explain the direction, but it does not operate the steering wheel alone. Stories sometimes encourage us to confuse suffering with goodness. A character has been hurt, therefore we instinctively assume there must still be something noble inside them. Perhaps there is. Suffering can deepen empathy, but it can also produce bitterness, entitlement, suspicion, and cruelty. Pain does not automatically purify anyone. Sometimes it teaches compassion. Sometimes it teaches a person to make sure they are never powerless again, even if that means making everyone around them powerless instead. That is why the wounded villain can be so persuasive. Their damage is visible. Their reasoning is emotionally coherent. We can trace the path from injury to anger, from anger to obsession, and from obsession to destruction. Because the progression makes sense, it begins to feel inevitable. But inevitability is one of storytelling's most convincing illusions. A character may say they had no choice, while the story quietly shows us every choice they rejected along the way. The audience may ignore those rejected choices because they complicate the sympathy. Help was available, but the character refused. Someone offered honesty, but the character punished them for it. A peaceful option existed, but it did not provide the satisfaction of revenge. An apology could have interrupted the damage, but pride mattered more. These moments reveal character more clearly than the original wound. Many people are injured. The deeper question is what they believe the injury now entitles them to do. Entitlement is often where sympathy begins transforming into danger. The character decides that because they suffered, they are owed power, loyalty, obedience, recognition, love, or repayment. They no longer want healing. They want compensation. The world must return what was taken, even if the repayment comes from people who had nothing to do with the original loss. Personal pain becomes a private debt to sign to the public. This pattern appears in fiction because it appears constantly in human behavior. People carry old betrayals into new relationships. They punish current partners for former partners. They distrust loyal friends because someone else was disloyal. They control children because their own childhood felt unstable. They humiliate employees because they once felt insignificant. The original injury may be real, but the new target is often innocent. When audiences excuse that behavior, they may believe they are practicing empathy. In reality, empathy without boundaries can become participation. It can protect the person causing harm while leaving everyone around them to absorb the consequences. The villain remains emotionally centered. The victims become supporting characters. In the villain's personal growth story, that imbalance appears whenever we become more interested in whether the harmful person can be redeemed than in what happened to the people they harmed. We wait for the dramatic apology, the courageous sacrifice, the final moment of clarity. Meanwhile, the damage has already occurred. Trust has been broken. Lives have been changed. People have been frightened, manipulated, abandoned, or destroyed. Redemption may still be possible, but redemption does not reverse time. This is an important distinction because popular storytelling often treats one noble act as emotional repayment for years of destruction. The villain saves someone at the last moment, turns against a larger threat, admits the truth, or sacrifices themselves, and suddenly the audience feels the account has been settled. It is emotionally satisfying because the story reaches resolution. Morally, the arithmetic may be considerably less tidy. A final good decision can reveal that change was possible. It can show courage, remorse, or recovered humanity. It cannot automatically erase every earlier choice. One act may change how we understand the person without changing what other people endured because of them. Acknowledging redemption does not require pretending there was no debt. The word redemption itself is sometimes used casually. Redemption is not simply feeling bad. Regret can be entirely self-centered. A person may regret losing their reputation, their relationship, their position, their freedom, or their audience. They may regret the consequences without regretting the harm. Genuine remorse shifts attention away from personal discomfort and toward the experience of the people affected. Redemption also requires change that costs something. It may require surrendering control, accepting consequences, returning what was taken, telling the truth when a lie would be easier, or allowing someone to leave without punishing them. It may require living differently after the dramatic scene ends. Without change, remorse is merely emotion. Without repair, apology is only language. Audiences can overlook that because confession feels powerful. A character finally admits they were wrong, and the honesty produces relief. Yet admitting the truth after every other option has collapsed is not the same as choosing truth. When deception was still working, timing reveals motive. Some apologies are acts of conscience. Others are attempts to recover access, sympathy, influence, or control. Charm can make that distinction harder to see. A charismatic person can make accountability feel like cruelty. They may appear so wounded, intelligent, entertaining, or self-aware that asking them to face consequences seems excessive. The audience begins protecting the quality of the performance, rather than evaluating the behavior underneath it. This occurs beyond fiction as well. Public figures often develop audiences that feel personally connected to them. The audience has listened to their music, watched their films, followed their career, repeated their jokes, worn their clothing, defended their opinions, or attached important memories to their work. When troubling information emerges, the audience is not only being asked to reconsider the person, it may feel as though they are being asked to reconsider part of themselves. That is where identity enters the equation. Supporting someone can become more than a preference. It becomes evidence of taste, intelligence, loyalty, politics, rebellion, or cultural belonging. Criticism of the figure then feels like criticism of the supporter. Defending the person becomes a way of defending one's own judgment. This is why public conversations about admired figures can become so irrational so quickly. The facts may be serious, but the emotional argument is personal. People are not simply evaluating evidence. They are protecting memories, communities, investments, and versions of themselves. They remember what the artist's work meant during a difficult year. They remember the athlete inspiring them as a child. They remember the actor representing something they had never seen represented before. Those experiences are real, even when the admired person later causes harm. The difficulty is learning that meaningful work can come from flawed people without requiring us to deny the flaws. A song may remain important. A performance may remain powerful. A cultural breakthrough may remain historically significant. Acknowledging those things does not require constructing innocence where evidence suggests otherwise. People often resist that complexity because they believe only two options exist: total devotion or total erasure. Either the person must be defended completely, or everything they ever created must become worthless. That binary thinking mirrors the same hero and villain framework we claim to be examining. It asks us to declare the entire person pure or contaminated, valuable or disposable, good or evil. Reality usually demands a more demanding response. We may need to recognize talent and misconduct at the same time. We may need to appreciate an achievement while refusing to protect the person from accountability. We may need to admit that someone contributed something meaningful and also caused serious harm. Holding both truths can feel uncomfortable, but discomfort is not the same as confusion. Selective morality often appears when loyalty becomes stronger than principle. People condemn behavior when an enemy does it, and excuse the same behavior when an ally does it. Cruelty becomes honesty. Manipulation becomes strategy. Arrogance becomes confidence. Recklessness becomes courage. The behavior has not changed. Only the person performing it has changed. This double standard reveals that the principle may never have been the real priority. The priority was the team. Once people identify with a side, moral language becomes flexible. We stop asking whether the act was right and begin asking whether the person was useful, entertaining, successful, or aligned with us. Fiction can expose this tendency with remarkable precision. A story may allow the audience to cheer when the central character humiliates someone, breaks a rule, or takes revenge. Later, another character performs a similar act against someone the audience cares about, and suddenly the behavior appears cruel. The difference is not the action. The difference is where the camera placed our loyalty. That realization can be uncomfortable because it shows how easily perspective manipulates judgment. We like to imagine our moral decisions are stable and objective. In practice, proximity matters. Charm matters. Familiarity matters. Group identity matters. The same behavior feels different depending on who receives it and who performs it. This is not proof that morality is meaningless. It is evidence that people are inconsistent. Recognizing that inconsistency can make us more careful. We can ask whether we would defend the same behavior if it came from someone we disliked. We can ask whether the explanation we are accepting would satisfy us if the victim was someone we loved. We can ask whether we are evaluating the act or protecting the attachment? Those questions become especially important when a villain directs harm toward people the story has not fully developed. Background characters are easy to sacrifice because the audience knows little about them. Their lives may exist only long enough to demonstrate the villain's power, raise the stakes, or motivate the hero. Because we are not invited into their homes, relationships, memories, and fears, their suffering can feel abstract. This is one reason fictional destruction can become spectacle. Buildings collapse, cities burn, employees disappear, guards are eliminated, entire communities experience consequences, while the audience remains focused on the central conflict. The story does not pause long enough for those people to become real. Scale can make harm feel less personal rather than more. The same psychological distance can operate in reality. People become numbers, categories, or labels. Once individuality disappears, compassion becomes easier to ration. 1,000 harmed people may receive less emotional attention than one charismatic person explaining why they caused the harm. The individual has a face, a voice, a backstory, and a platform. The victims may appear only as a total, a responsible. Story can correct that imbalance by restoring perspective. It can show the consequences outside the villain's emotional world. It can allow victims to exist as people rather than moral furniture. It can demonstrate that the villain's pain is not the only pain in the room. This does not weaken the villain's complexity. It strengthens the story's honesty. A person can be wounded and dangerous. They can be charismatic and abusive. They can love deeply and still behave destructively. They can speak truth about one injustice while committing another. They can deserve understanding and consequences simultaneously. That word simultaneously is important. People often treat compassion and accountability as opposing forces. They are not. Accountability without compassion can become punishment for the pleasure of punishment. Compassion without accountability can become protection for the person causing harm. A mature response requires both. We can understand why someone became who they are and still insist they are responsible for what they do. We can recognize that a person was failed by family, community, government, education, medicine, or circumstance, and still acknowledge the people they later failed. One truth does not cancel the other. The failure to hold both truths often produces one of two extremes. In one direction, the villain is reduced to a monster with no history, humanity, or possibility of change. In the other direction, the villain's history becomes so dominant that everyone harmed by them disappears. Neither approach tells the complete story. The first approach makes accountability easy but understanding impossible. The second makes understanding easy but accountability inconvenient. Strong storytelling refuses both comforts. It allows the character's pain to be real without making it the only pain that matters. This is particularly important in stories involving abuse, manipulation, or control. These villains are not always obvious. They may not threaten cities or command armies. They may appear caring, protective, generous, or emotionally intense. Their power operates through affection, obligation, confusion, and fear. They make control sound like concern. They make jealousy sound like devotion. They make isolation sound like loyalty, because the behavior arrives wrapped in emotion. The audience may initially interpret it as passion. The villain says they cannot live without someone, and the statement sounds romantic, until we consider the burden being placed on the other person. They say they are only trying to protect the relationship, but protection begins requiring surveillance, permission, and obedience. Stories can unintentionally glamorize this behavior when intensity is mistaken for depth. Obsession receives dramatic music. Possession receives beautiful dialogue. Boundary violations are framed as determination. The character refuses to accept rejection, and the story rewards persistence rather than examining disrespect. The distinction between devotion and control is simple in theory and difficult in practice. Devotion respects the other person's freedom. Control fears it. Devotion wants connection. Control demands access. Devotion can survive hearing no. Control treats no as betrayal. When audiences root for characters who ignore boundaries, their fantasy may feel harmless because fiction contains the outcome. The pursued person may eventually fall in love. The grand gesture may repair everything. The relentless character may be proven correct. In real life, the same behavior can produce fear, exhaustion, isolation, and danger. This does not mean stories must become instructional manuals, or that every questionable character requires a warning label. Art should explore difficult behavior. The responsibility lies in understanding what emotional framing is doing. Are we being invited to examine the behavior, or simply celebrate it because the person performing it is attractive, charming, or central to the plot? Attractiveness influences judgment more than most people enjoy admitting. Beautiful people are often granted emotional complexity more quickly. Their cruelty is called damage. Their silence is called mystery. Their arrogance is called confidence. The same behavior in a less appealing character may be recognized immediately as unpleasant. Style creates a similar distortion. A well-dressed villain with excellent dialogue and controlled body language appears sophisticated. A disorganized villain behaving identically appears unstable. Presentation does not change morality, but it changes reception. Audiences frequently confuse polish with discipline and confidence with credibility. Success can provide another layer of protection. Once a character or public figure becomes powerful, people begin interpreting the power as evidence of worth. They must be intelligent. They must be special. They must know something others do not. Their victories become part of their moral defense. But success measures effectiveness, not goodness. A person can be highly effective at exploitation, manipulation, intimidation, deception, or domination. Competence tells us whether someone can achieve an objective. It does not tell us whether the objective deserves to be achieved. Power also changes how consequences are distributed. The powerful villain may never personally experience the damage they create. Other people lose jobs, homes, safety, relationships, or freedom while the person at the center remains insulated. That distance can make cruelty appear clean. Orders are given in quiet rooms. The visible violence is performed elsewhere. Audiences may admire the calmness without noticing that calm is easier when someone else is absorbing the risk. The villain appears composed because they have arranged for panic to belong to everyone. Beneath them, control is not always evidence of strength. Sometimes it is evidence that the consequences have been outsourced. This is where rooting for the bad guy becomes more than a harmless preference. It becomes an opportunity to examine what qualities we instinctively reward. Are we impressed by confidence even when it silences others? Do we admire ambition even when it consumes everyone nearby? Do we confuse emotional distance with strength? Do we celebrate rule breaking only when the consequences fall on people we do not know? These questions are not accusations. Enjoying a villain does not make the audience immoral. Fiction is a space for contradiction. We can love a performance, quote the dialogue, admire the style, and enjoy the chaos without copying the ethics. The danger appears only when our emotional attachment prevents us from recognizing what the story is showing. The healthiest audience response may be the ability to enjoy the villain completely while judging them clearly. We can appreciate the construction of the character without joining their defense team. We can feel sympathy without filing an appeal. Against every consequence, we can understand the wound without handing it legal ownership of the future. A villain does not become less interesting when we hold them accountable. Often, the opposite happens. Consequences reveal whether their confidence was genuine. They reveal whether the character can face truth without manipulation, loss without retaliation, and rejection without destruction. Accountability removes. The stage lighting and shows us what remains. Some villains collapse when they can no longer control the narrative. Others finally begin changing. That difference may be the clearest measure of all. A person committed only to appearing good will fight exposure. A person becoming better will confront what the exposure reveals. Sympathy should never require blindness. It should sharpen our perception rather than soften it into uselessness. The point of understanding someone is not to make every choice acceptable. It is to see the choice clearly, along with the history, pressure, desire, fear, and consequence surrounding it. That is where sympathy retains its integrity. It says, I can see how you arrived here. I can recognize the pain that shaped you. I can acknowledge the humanity that remains inside you. And I can still say that what you did was wrong. The mature audience does not have to stop rooting for the possibility of change. It simply stops confusing possibility with proof. Change must become visible. Remorse must become action. Accountability must be accepted rather than negotiated away. The bad guy may still have a path forward, but sympathy alone cannot walk it for them. If you've made it this far with us, you may have noticed something interesting. We've spent a great deal of time talking about villains, but very little time talking about ourselves. Maybe that's because it's easier to analyze fictional characters than it is to examine the reasons we become attached to them. It is far more comfortable to debate whether someone else deserves sympathy than to ask why a particular character resonated so deeply with us in the first place. Here's a thought worth sitting with. Your favorite villain probably says as much about you as it does about the writer who created them. Not because you secretly want to become that person, not because you approve of their decisions, but because somewhere inside their worldview, personality, confidence, frustration, intelligence, humor, loneliness, rebellion, or ambition, something echoed against your own experience. You recognized a feeling before you evaluated the behavior. That is one of storytelling's greatest achievements. It allows us to recognize pieces of ourselves inside people we would never choose to become. Think about how differently audiences respond to the same character. One person admires the strategist because they appreciate intelligence. Another admires the rebel because they've spent their life questioning authority. Someone else connects with the outcast because they've always felt misunderstood. Another notices the perfectionist because they understand the exhausting desire to control every variable. Four people watch the exact same story and walk away with four completely different emotional experiences. The villain acts like a psychological Rorschach test. We often project our own experiences into the empty spaces between their actions. Someone raised under strict rules may admire their refusal to obey. Someone who has always felt powerless may admire their confidence. Someone who has spent years being overlooked may understand their hunger for recognition. Someone recovering from betrayal may even sympathize with their distrust, while still rejecting what they eventually do with it. Notice something important here. The attraction is rarely toward the destruction. It is toward the emotional condition underneath there. Destruction. That distinction changes everything. Very few people watch a villain and think, I hope innocent people suffer. Far more often the thought sounds something like, I understand feeling ignored. I understand wanting respect. I understand being underestimated. I understand wanting the world to finally notice me. The audience identifies with the beginning of the emotional journey, not necessarily its destination. This is why different stages of life often produce different favorite characters. The villain you admired at 16 may seem childish at 35. The hero you once considered boring may suddenly become fascinating after you've raised children, managed employees, cared for aging parents, survived illness, or experienced loss. Life quietly edits your emotional priorities without asking permission. Age changes what we admire, experience changes what we forgive, responsibility changes what we celebrate. A teenager may admire absolute independence. An adult raising a family may begin admiring reliability instead. Someone who once found chaos exciting may eventually discover that peace requires extraordinary discipline. The story did not change. The viewer did. That evolution is healthy. In fact, revisiting stories every decade can become a fascinating exercise in self-discovery. Characters remain frozen on the page while we continue accumulating victories, disappointments, heartbreaks, careers, relationships, and responsibilities. Every new viewing becomes a comparison between who we were and who we have become. Sometimes we discover we no longer identify with the person we thought represented us. Sometimes we realize we never really understood the hero. Sometimes the background. Character suddenly becomes the wisest person in the entire story. That shift reminds us that stories are not static experiences. They are conversations between the work and the person experiencing it. Our emotional responses also reveal the values we prioritize. Do we admire intelligence more than kindness? Independence more than cooperation? Confidence more than humility? Authenticity more than diplomacy? Order more than freedom? Justice more than mercy? None of those questions have universally correct answers, because each value can become destructive when separated from the others. Confidence without humility becomes arrogance. Justice without mercy becomes vengeance. Freedom without responsibility becomes chaos. Loyalty without honesty becomes blind. Obedience without ambition, without compassion, becomes exploitation. Even our favorite villains often represent one admirable quality stretched beyond its healthy limit. Their strength was never the problem. The absence of balance was. Perhaps that is why sophisticated stories refuse to create villains who are evil at absolutely everything. If they did, there would be nothing to examine. Instead, they are often courageous, intelligent, disciplined, loyal to a select few, creative, determined, or visionary. Those qualities attract us because, in moderation, they are genuinely valuable. The tragedy begins when one strength grows so large that it crushes every other virtue around it. This observation applies far beyond fiction. Many of the people we admire in business, politics, entertainment, sports, or history possess qualities that would be difficult to live beside every single day. Extraordinary achievement frequently requires unusual levels of obsession, confidence, competitiveness, persistence, or emotional endurance. The same qualities that produce greatness can also create strained relationships, isolation, burnout, or enormous blind spots. That doesn't make greatness immoral. It simply reminds us that human beings are rarely balanced by accident. Balance usually requires intention. There is another reason we become attached to certain villains. Sometimes they give voice to emotions we've been taught to suppress. Most people learn very early that certain feelings are socially acceptable, while others are not. Gratitude is acceptable. Envy is not. Patience is acceptable. Rage is not. Forgiveness is admirable. Revenge is dangerous. Humility is celebrated. Pride is suspicious. Yet all of these emotions exist inside ordinary people. Ignoring them does not make them disappear. Stories become emotional laboratories where those forbidden emotions can be examined safely. The villain becomes the volunteer willing to carry feelings the audience would rather not publicly admit they have experienced. That does not make those emotions shameful. It makes them human. What matters is not whether anger exists. What matters is what anger becomes. The same is true of jealousy, resentment, ambition, loneliness, insecurity, fear, and disappointment. Every one of those emotions can become fuel for growth or fuel for destruction. The emotion itself is rarely the villain. The response usually determines the outcome. Perhaps that is why stories remain so valuable. They allow us to watch emotional choices unfold without paying the real-world price ourselves. We witness obsession consuming someone else's life. We observe revenge refusing to satisfy the person seeking it. We watch unchecked pride isolate the very individual who wanted admiration. Fiction lets us rehearse wisdom before life demands it from us personally. There is another subtle lesson hiding beneath all of this. The villain we reject most strongly may also reveal something about ourselves. Sometimes the character who irritates us is reflecting a quality we dislike recognizing within our own personality. Psychologists have discussed this phenomenon for decades. Human beings often react most intensely to traits they are actively struggling against themselves. Arrogance irritates the insecure. Dishonesty frustrates people desperately trying to become trustworthy. Cowardice bothers someone fighting to become courageous. Of course, that is not always true. Sometimes a villain simply represents genuine harm. But occasionally our strongest reactions deserve curiosity instead of immediate certainty. Why did that character bother me so much? What exactly felt familiar? Why did I become emotionally invested so quickly? Those questions can be more revealing than any personality test. By now, you may have noticed something ironic. We began this episode believing we were discussing villains. Instead, we've spent much of our time discussing human nature. Villains simply happen to be one of the most effective mirrors ever invented. They reflect our fears, our values, our blind spots, our ambitions, our frustrations, and sometimes even our unrealized potential. That may be the real reason they continue surviving generation after generation. The costume changes, the setting changes, the technology changes, but the mirror remains, and every generation eventually finds itself staring into it, convinced it is only looking at the bad guy, before realizing almost reluctantly, that the reflection has been asking questions about the audience all along. Maybe that is the final twist no one expects. The villain was never the only character being written. So were we. Stories benefit from villains because villains provide direction. They clarify the conflict, raise the stakes, and give the audience someone to resist. Real life is far less organized. Problems rarely arrive wearing a recognizable costume. Harm is often distributed across systems, habits, incentives, institutions, misunderstandings, and ordinary people making individually reasonable decisions that collectively produce unreasonable outcomes. Reality gives us complications. The human mind keeps requesting a culprit. That desire is understandable. A bad guy makes confusion manageable. Once someone has been identified as the source of the problem, uncertainty begins to disappear. We know who deserves blame. We know who should be removed. We know which side we are on. The world feels temporarily organized because an emotionally satisfying explanation has replaced a complicated one. The difficulty begins when emotional satisfaction is mistaken for accuracy. Many problems have human faces attached to them, but that does not mean one human face explains the entire problem. A company may have a reckless executive, but the culture that rewarded recklessness may remain after that executive leaves. A corrupt official may be removed, but the incentives that encourage corruption may continue operating. A family may blame one difficult relative while ignoring the communication patterns that involve everyone. A workplace may fire the employee. Described as negative without examining why so many people privately agreed with what that employee was saying. Removing the visible villain can provide relief without producing change. The room becomes quieter, but the machinery continues running. This is one reason scapegoating has remained effective throughout history. It converts a complicated burden into a simple target. Rather than confront economic inequality, institutional failure, cultural anxiety, or political mismanagement, a community can be encouraged to blame a specific group. The explanation becomes easy to remember, emotionally charged, and difficult to question without appearing disloyal. The scapegoat does not need to have caused the problem. They only need to be available, recognizable, and vulnerable enough to carry it. Once a group has been assigned that role, almost any evidence can be made to fit the story. Success becomes proof of secret control. Failure becomes proof of inferiority. Visibility becomes intrusion. Withdrawal becomes suspicion. Defense becomes aggression. Silence becomes guilt. The conclusion has already been chosen, so every new detail is interpreted in a way that protects it. This is how villain narratives become self-sealing. Contradictory evidence does not weaken the belief. It becomes additional evidence of deception. The alleged villain is considered so manipulative that even innocence can be presented as part of the manipulation. At that point, the story is no longer investigating reality. It is defending itself from reality. The same pattern can occur on a smaller scale. Inside a family, one person may become the designated source of tension. Every disagreement is linked back to their personality. Other people are permitted moods, mistakes, poor timing, and stress. The designated villain is treated as evidence that the family's entire problem has returned. Perhaps that person does behave badly. Perhaps they have genuinely caused harm. But when one person becomes responsible for every uncomfortable feeling in the room, the arrangement also protects everyone else from self-examination. The family can remain exactly as it is, while insisting peace would exist if only the difficult person changed. Friend groups develop similar narratives. A friendship ends, and everyone begins collecting a simplified explanation. One person was jealous. One person was selfish. One person changed. One person ruined everything. The version may contain truth, but complicated relationships rarely collapse because of one isolated quality. Expectations shifted. Communication failed. Resentment accumulated. Boundaries were unclear. People avoided difficult conversations until the conflicts became easier to dramatize than repair. The villain story arrives afterward and gives everyone relief. It explains the ending while protecting the identities of those telling it. Romantic relationships may produce the most emotionally powerful versions. After a painful breakup, people naturally search for coherence. One partner becomes the narcissist. The other becomes the victim. One was toxic. The other merely survived. Sometimes those descriptions are accurate and necessary. Abuse should not be blurred into mutual misunderstanding for the sake of appearing sophistication. But in ordinary relational failure, language designed to identify serious patterns can also be used to avoid. Recognizing ordinary human contribution. Every selfish act proves a personality disorder. Not every disagreement is manipulation. Not every boundary is punishment. Not every disappointment is betrayal. Clinical language can provide clarity, but when used carelessly, it can also transform every conflict into a courtroom and every former partner into a diagnosis. The benefit is obvious. Diagnosis creates distance. It allows the story to close. The other person was not simply incompatible, immature, frightened, avoidant, inconsiderate, or unprepared. They were fundamentally defective. The relationship did not fail because two imperfect people could not build something sustainable. It failed because one recognizable villain entered the narrative. Again, sometimes there truly is a villain. The danger lies in needing one every time. That need can prevent growth because growth often begins with an inconvenient question. What part of this belongs to me? That question is not the same as accepting blame for someone else's harm. It is not asking a victim to share responsibility with an abuser. It is asking whether there were warnings ignored, boundaries left unstated, patterns repeated, conversations avoided, or personal needs misunderstood. Accountability can be unequal without becoming non-existent. In public life, villain stories become even more powerful because they can unite enormous groups of people. Nothing creates collective identity faster than a common enemy. People who disagree about nearly everything else may suddenly feel connected because they despise the same person, party, institution, generation, industry, neighborhood, or idea. Shared opposition can resemble unity while containing very little shared purpose. It is easy to organize people around what they reject. It is much more difficult to organize them around what they intend to build. Anger supplies immediate energy. Construction requires patience, compromise, expertise, maintenance, and the possibility that no one will receive dramatic credit. The villain narrative thrives in that gap. It suggests that progress does not require a complicated plan. It requires defeating the correct enemy. This is politically useful because policy is difficult to explain. Budgets involve trade-offs. Infrastructure requires years. Education reform produces delayed results. Healthcare systems contain competing pressures. Economic policy can help one population while burdening another. None of this fits comfortably inside a slogan. A villain fits beautifully. The opponent can be described as corrupt, dangerous, unpatriotic, ignorant, immoral, elitist, radical, weak, or evil. Once that identity is established, the public no longer needs to understand the details of the proposal. Supporting the proposal becomes a way to defeat the villain. Opposing it becomes evidence of alliance with the villain. The emotional conflict replaces the policy. Discussion. This does not mean political leaders are interchangeable or that every disagreement deserves equal moral weight. Some policies cause measurable harm. Some leaders exploit fear deliberately. Some movements threaten rights, safety, or democratic participation. Moral clarity remains necessary. But clarity should emerge from evidence, behavior, and consequences, not merely from the emotional usefulness of having someone to hate. Hatred can produce focus, but it is a poor long-term governing philosophy. A society organized primarily around enemies eventually requires a steady supply of them. Once one villain is defeated, another must be located. The emotional machinery cannot remain idle because the group's identity depends on opposition. Without the enemy, internal disagreements become visible. Questions about leadership, fairness, competence, and results become harder to avoid. That is why movements built entirely around resentment often become suspicious of their own members. Purity tests expand. Minor disagreement becomes betrayal. People who once marched together begin policing one another's language, intentions, associations, and history. The villain moves from outside the group to inside it. The search becomes increasingly precise. At first, the enemy is anyone opposing the cause. Later, the enemy includes anyone supporting it incorrectly. This transformation is predictable because villain thinking depends on moral simplification. People are divided into trustworthy and dangerous, enlightened and ignorant, loyal and disloyal. Nuance begins to look like weakness. Questions begin to look like sabotage. Curiosity begins to look like sympathy for the enemy. Once curiosity is punished, error becomes difficult to correct. Every healthy institution needs a way to receive uncomfortable information. Governments need opposition. Companies need employees willing to report problems. Families need members who can name dysfunction. Creative teams need criticism. Relationships need honesty that does not disappear when it becomes inconvenient. Villain culture makes those functions dangerous. The person delivering the warning becomes easier to attack than the warning itself. Whistleblowers are called disloyal. Critics are called bitter. Employees raising concerns are described as difficult. Family members naming old wounds are accused of creating drama. Citizens questioning leadership are accused of helping the enemy. The message is avoided by assigning a role to the messenger. Once again, the story wins because the story is emotionally cleaner. This is why language matters. Words such as evil, monster, traitor, enemy, infestation, threat, and disease do more than describe. They establish permission. When a person is represented as less than human, ordinary moral restraint begins to loosen. Compassion appears misplaced. Dialogue appears naive. Punishment begins to feel not only acceptable, but virtuous. Dehumanization rarely begins with violence. It begins with vocabulary. First, the individual becomes a type. Then the type becomes a threat. Then the threat becomes a problem that must be solved. process can happen so gradually that people participating in it continue to consider themselves reasonable. They may insist they are merely being honest, protecting their community, defending tradition, pursuing safety, or refusing political correctness. Yet the language steadily reduces the humanity of those being discussed. Once people are reduced to symbols, their actual behavior matters less. They become responsible for whatever fear the symbol carries. This symbolic thinking is intensified by media systems built around attention. Outrage travels quickly because it provides immediate emotional clarity. A complicated explanation asks the audience to slow down. A villain clip asks only that they react. The clip may be 10 seconds long. The conclusion may be permanent. Platforms reward certainty because certainty encourages sharing. A hesitant person says, "There may be more context." A confident person says, "This proves exactly who they are." The second statement performs better because it offers the audience a ready-made emotion and a ready-made identity. People are not only consuming information, they're being invited to join a side. The algorithm does not necessarily care which side. Anger in either direction produces engagement. Defenders comment. Critics comment. Spectators argue about the argument. The villain becomes commercially useful because conflict extends attention. A person can become famous through admiration or condemnation. Both keep the name circulating. This creates an uncomfortable incentive. Public figures may benefit from becoming villains to the correct audience. Outrage generates visibility. Visibility creates influence. Influence can create revenue. The individual may deliberately provoke opposition because every furious response distributes the message further. The audience believes it is punishing the person by discussing them constantly. The person may be converting that punishment into reach. That this changes villainy from a reputation problem into a branding strategy. The modern provocateur understands that universal approval is unnecessary. A loyal minority can be more profitable than broad indifference. The goal is not to be loved by everyone. The goal is to become impossible for everyone to ignore. That dynamic also affects entertainment. Certain performers, athletes, commentators, musicians, and influencers developed public identities built around antagonism. They insult opponents, violate expectations, reject conventional politeness, and transform criticism into evidence that they are authentic. Their supporters feel they are witnessing someone courageous enough to say what everyone else is afraid to say. Their critics feel they are witnessing irresponsibility rewarded with attention. Both groups remain engaged. The person at the center becomes less an individual than a recurring event. The danger is not that audiences enjoy conflict. Performance has always included rivalry, provocation, and theatrical opposition. The danger appears when theatrical habits become the default language of civic life. Every disagreement becomes a feud. Every election becomes an apocalypse. Every mistake becomes proof of evil. Every compromise becomes surrender. A democracy cannot function indefinitely, like a professional wrestling storyline. Neither can a family, neither can a workplace, neither can a relationship. Human cooperation requires the ability to disagree without converting the other person into a moral contaminant. That does not mean every position deserves respect. Some ideas are dishonest, discriminatory, dangerous, or cruel. Rejecting an idea may be necessary. Stopping harmful behavior may be necessary. Ending a relationship may be necessary. The distinction lies between confronting conduct and erasing personhood. When someone becomes nothing more than the worst thing they have ever done, change becomes conceptually impossible. If the identity is permanent, improvement cannot matter. Apology cannot matter. Education cannot matter. Restitution cannot matter. The person can only remain the villain or disappear. That may feel satisfying in severe cases where accountability has been repeatedly avoided. But as a general social philosophy, permanent moral branding creates a culture with no mechanism for return. A culture without return eventually teaches people to hide rather than change. Why admit error if admission results in permanent exile? Why apologize if apology becomes additional evidence? Why grow if no one will acknowledge growth? Accountability should involve consequences, but consequences without a path toward restoration can become another form of spectacle. Restoration does not mean automatic forgiveness. The person harmed does not owe access, reconciliation, or emotional closure. Communities are not required to restore trust before trust has been rebuilt. Some roles may never be appropriate again. Some relationships should remain ended. A path back is not the same as a path back to everything. It is the possibility that a human being can become more than the record of their failure. Without that possibility, society becomes strangely committed to the same fixed identities that villain stories depend upon. The hero must remain pure. The villain must remain corrupted. New evidence becomes inconvenient because it threatens the roles. This can be especially difficult when punishment itself becomes entertainment. Public downfall produces a rush. People gather around the story, waiting for firings, cancellations, expulsions, divorces, arrests, resignations, and humiliating statements. Some consequences may be justified, yet the pleasure surrounding them deserves examination. Justice and enjoyment are not identical. A person may deserve accountability, while the crowd's appetite for humiliation reveals something separate. The crowd can begin claiming moral purpose while behaving with very little mercy. Private information is distributed. Family members are targeted. Old photographs are searched. Employers are contacted. Anyone associated with the accused is pressured to denounce them publicly. The goal moves beyond correcting harm and toward achieving total social destruction. That escalation is often justified by the original offense. But collective punishment expands quickly. People who did not commit the act become part of the villain's orbit. Silence becomes complicity. Nuance becomes defense. Context becomes excuse. The social ritual begins resembling the very cruelty it claims to oppose. This does not mean consequences should be gentle, enough to protect powerful people from discomfort. Public scrutiny can expose behavior institutions tried to hide. Collective outrage has helped victims be heard, forced organizations to act, and challenged systems that relied on silence. The question is not whether public accountability is necessary. It is whether the purpose remains accountability once punishment becomes recreational. Purpose matters because it determines when enough is enough. A process seeking repair asks what must change. A process seeking revenge asks what else can be. Taken, the difference can be difficult to see when anger is justified. Anger is not the enemy. Anger identifies violation. It tells us that a boundary has been crossed, a person has been harmed, or a value has been betrayed. Anger can motivate courage and reform, but anger is information, not administration. It tells us something requires attention. It does not automatically design the wisest response. A society governed entirely by anger will confuse intensity with truth. The loudest accusation will feel most credible. The harshest consequence will appear most principled. The least forgiving person will appear most committed. Eventually, moderation itself becomes suspicious. Yet some of the most important moral decisions require calmness after the anger arrives. Evidence must be examined. Harm must be measured. Patterns must be distinguished from isolated mistakes. Intent may matter, though it does not erase impact. Power differences must be considered. Consequences must protect people without becoming arbitrary. None of that is dramatic. It is simply necessary. Villain thinking resists this slower work because it prefers verdicts to processes. Once the bad guy has been identified, investigation feels like delay. Procedure feels like protection. Fairness feels like softness. But systems that abandon fairness for people we despise eventually lose the ability to provide fairness to anyone. Principles matter. Most when applying them is emotionally inconvenient. That may be the true test of whether a society believes in justice or merely prefers its own side to win. The same principle applies personally. It is easy to believe in grace when we need it. It is harder when the person asking for it has disappointed us. It is easy to believe people are complicated when defending someone we love. It is harder when complexity interferes with anger toward someone we dislike. Consistency does not require identical consequences for every act. It requires examining behavior through standards that do not change entirely according to attachment. One useful question is whether we are trying to understand what happened or merely trying to confirm who we already believe someone is. Those are not the same. Investigation.B first can discover surprise. The second cannot. A person determined to find a villain will eventually succeed because every human being contains enough contradiction to be edited into one. We have all been selfish, defensive, impatient, dishonest, insensitive, jealous, or afraid. A selective record can make nearly anyone look monstrous. A complete record does not make everyone innocent. It makes judgment more accurate. Accuracy is less emotionally thrilling than condemnation, but it is far more useful. The healthiest response to harm may begin by separating several questions that villain thinking tries to collapse. What happened? Who was affected? What responsibility belongs to whom? Was the behavior intentional, reckless, negligent, habitual, or isolated? What consequence protects others? What repair is possible? What evidence would demonstrate change? Those questions create a process rather than a performance. They also leave room for the possibility that no single villain exists. Sometimes the problem is a culture. Sometimes it is an incentive. Sometimes it is neglect. Sometimes it is poor design. Sometimes it is fear distributed across thousands of ordinary decisions. Sometimes everyone involved believes they are being reasonable, and the result is still harmful. Those cases are harder because there is no satisfying person to remove. The solution requires changing rules, habits, expectations, structures, or resources. It requires people who did not intend harm to accept responsibility for participating in it. It requires cooperation between groups that may not trust one another. It requires patience long after the story stops trending. That that is real work. And real work is often less dramatic than defeating the bad guy. Perhaps the most mature question is not who is the villain, but what is producing the harm? That shift changes the investigation. It moves us away from identity and toward mechanism. A person may still need to be held accountable, removed from power, or prevented from causing further damage. But the process does not end with the individual. It examines what allowed the behavior to continue, who benefited, who remained silent, and what must change to prevent repetition. Otherwise, the same role will eventually be filled by someone else. The costume will change. The system will remain. This may be the deepest danger of needing a bad guy. The villain provides emotional closure before the problem has actually been solved. We celebrate the defeat, roll the credits, and return to normal, even when normal was the environment that produced the conflict. Reality does not end when the antagonist leaves the scene. The people affected still need repair. The institution still needs reform. The community still needs trust. The family still needs communication. The individual still needs to examine what they carried into the situation and what they may carry forward. The absence of a villain does not automatically create the presence of health. Peace is not simply what remains after the enemy disappears. Peace must be constructed. Trust must be rebuilt. Boundaries must be defined. Resources must be distributed. Responsibility must be accepted. People must learn how to remain human in the presence of disagreement. That requires something more difficult than choosing sides. It requires discernment. Discernment asks us to recognize genuine danger without manufacturing it. It asks us to confront harmful behavior without needing the person to become inhuman. It asks us to preserve empathy without allowing empathy to erase consequence. It asks us to remain open to evidence even when evidence threatens the story we prefer. It is not moral weakness, it is moral discipline. Anyone can condemn a villain written clearly enough. The greater challenge is recognizing harm in a person we admire, humanity in a person we oppose, and complexity in a situation that would feel much better if only one person were responsible. That may be where real maturity begins. Not in pretending. Villains do not exist. Not in refusing to take a side, when a side must be taken, but in resisting the temptation to turn every conflict into a myth, every opponent into a monster, and every victory into proof that the deeper problem has disappeared. Sometimes there is a bad guy. Sometimes there are several. Sometimes the greatest threat is a system that keeps producing them. And sometimes the story becomes dangerous because we need the villain more than we need the truth. There is a moment in certain stories when the audience realizes the danger was never contained inside one person. The villain may have a name, a face, a plan, and a recognizable voice, but the conditions that made them possible are everywhere. They were not created in isolation. They were encouraged, rewarded, ignored, entertained, financed, copied, tolerated, or quietly protected by a much larger system. That is when the story becomes uncomfortable. It is easy to condemn a villain standing alone. It is much harder to examine the crowd standing around them. Society often prefers the single bad person because a single bad person preserves everyone else's innocence. One corrupt leader allows the institution to call itself healthy. One abusive celebrity allows the industry to describe the behavior as an exception. One dishonest executive allows the company to claim its values remain intact. One violent individual allows the culture to pretend it did not spend years rewarding aggression, humiliation, domination, and control. The individual becomes the container for everything the larger group does not wish to examine. Once that person is removed, the group can perform relief. Statements are released. Policies are announced. People express shock. Everyone appears surprised by behavior that was apparently visible to everyone except the people officially responsible for noticing it. Then the cycle begins again. The new villain may look different. They may use different language, belong to a different generation, or operate through newer technology. But the incentives remain familiar. Confidence is rewarded even when it becomes arrogance. Loyalty is rewarded even when it becomes silence. Productivity is rewarded even when it depends on exhaustion. Growth is rewarded even when the cost is hidden. Attention is rewarded regardless of whether it was earned through wisdom or destruction. The system does not necessarily ask whether the behavior is good, it asks whether the behavior works. That distinction may explain more about modern life than people are comfortable admitting. Many destructive people are not initially punished for being destructive. They are rewarded for being effective. They increase revenue. They attract viewers. They win elections. They dominate meetings. They create fear. They move quickly. They produce results. The damage is tolerated because their output appears valuable. Society often objects only after the cost becomes public. Before the scandal, the person is described as intense, demanding, fearless, unconventional, relentless, visionary, or impossible. To ignore, after the scandal, those same qualities are reclassified as warning signs. Nothing about the behavior changed. Only the public usefulness of defending it disappeared. This raises an unsettling question. How many villains were considered heroes while they were still profitable? How many people were called difficult when they reported the truth too early? How many institutions knew exactly what was happening but calculated that silence was cheaper? The real villain may not always be the person who caused the first harm. It may be the environment that repeatedly decided the harm was acceptable. Environments teach behavior. They reveal what will be rewarded, what will be ignored, and who will be protected. People watch carefully. They learn which rules are serious and which exist only in writing. They learn whose pain receives attention and whose pain becomes administrative inconvenience. A workplace may claim to value respect while promoting the most intimidating person in the building. A school may claim to oppose bullying while rewarding popularity regardless of behavior. A family may claim to value honesty while punishing the person who names the truth. A community may claim to value fairness while reserving compassion for people who already belong. The contradiction does not remain abstract. It becomes instruction. People understand culture less through official language than through visible consequences. They notice who gets away with what. They notice who must apologize and who is described as misunderstood. They notice whose anger is taken seriously and whose anger is considered threatening. They notice whose mistakes become lessons and whose mistakes become identities. That pattern teaches everyone how much humanity they are. Permitted. This is where the camera begins turning toward society itself. Society is not a mysterious force living somewhere above us. It is the accumulated behavior of ordinary people. It is what we normalize, purchase, repeat, reward, laugh at, excuse, defend, and refuse to challenge. It is built through decisions so small that each individual can pretend their contribution did not matter. One person shares their humiliating video, another adds a joke, another watches without commenting, another says the victim should have known better, another insists everyone is too sensitive, another profits from the attention. No single action appears large enough to explain the damage. Yet together they produce a machine. That machine can destroy someone while allowing every participant to feel only slightly involved. Distance makes this easier. Online, people are often reduced to content before they are recognized as human. Their embarrassment becomes a clip. Their grief becomes a headline. Their mistake becomes a meme. Their collapse becomes an event scheduled between advertisements. The audience may forget that the person remains alive after the trend ends. They still have a family. They still need to enter rooms. They still live inside the consequences of a moment millions of strangers consumed casually. We say the internet is cruel as though the internet made an independent decision. The internet is people. It is us, multiplied. Technology accelerates behavior, but it does not invent the appetite behind it. Human beings have always gathered around public humiliation. The village square became the newspaper. The newspaper became television. Television became the feed. The mechanism improved, but the emotional attraction remained. We want to know who fell. We want to know why. We want to know whether they deserved it. We want to watch the apology. We want to judge whether the apology felt sincere enough. Then we want someone else to summarize the entire event in under 60 seconds. The speed is new. The appetite is ancient. Society frequently disguises that appetite as morality. We tell ourselves we are observing accountability. Sometimes we are. Public exposure can reveal genuine abuse, corruption, hypocrisy, or danger. It can give power to people who are ignored. It can force action where institutions preferred silence. But the line between accountability and entertainment can disappear quickly. The moment suffering becomes enjoyable, the moral purpose has changed. People may still use the language of justice, but the emotional energy becomes something else. The jokes grow sharper. The punishment expands. Family members are dragged into the story. Old mistakes are added to strengthen the case. The target is no longer expected to correct the behavior. They are expected to remain available for destruction. That is when society begins behaving like the villain it believes it is defeating. Cruelty does not become kindness because the target is unpopular. Humiliation does not become healing because the crowd agrees. Dehumanization does not become ethical because the person made a serious mistake. The challenge is recognizing that accountability and cruelty can occupy the same event. A consequence may be necessary. The celebration surrounding it may still reveal something disturbing. This is not a defense of harmful people. It is an examination of the audience. The person at the center may deserve removal, exposure, prosecution, rejection, or loss of authority. But what does it mean when the crowd appears disappointed that the suffering is not more dramatic? What does it mean when the punishment must become visible to feel real? What does it mean when private remorse is considered meaningless unless it performs publicly for strangers? The real villain might be our hunger for spectacle. Spectacle simplifies emotion. It gives us a target and an ending. It allows outrage to feel like participation. We can share, comment, condemn, and move on without building anything in place of what was destroyed. This is why society often prefers scandal too. Reform. Scandal is immediate. Reform is slow. Scandal gives us a face. Reform gives us a meeting. Scandal produces a dramatic statement. Reform produces policy language no one wants to read. Scandal allows everyone to agree that one person was terrible. Reform asks who benefited, who knew, who remained quiet, and what must change. Reform is more threatening because it distributes responsibility. The villain may be obvious. The enablers are often ordinary. They are assistants, colleagues, managers, relatives, followers, customers, voters, fans, and bystanders. They are people who did not begin the harm but helped create the conditions in which it could continue. Most enablers do not experience themselves as villains. They experience themselves as practical. They needed the job. They did not know the whole story. They did not want conflict. They assumed someone else would handle it. They believed the person would eventually change. They thought the problem was not serious enough. They were afraid of becoming their next target. Every explanation may contain truth. Together, they form protection. Silence is rarely empty. Silence has effects. It protects the powerful more often than the vulnerable, because the powerful can continue operating while everyone else waits for certainty. The demand for perfect evidence can become a convenient delay. People say they do not want to judge too quickly, but sometimes caution is selectively applied. Certain people are granted endless complexity. Others are condemned after one incomplete clip. Who receives patience is often a measure of power. A respected person is described as complicated. An unknown person is described as dangerous. A wealthy person has a troubled history. A poor person has a record. A famous person made a mistake. An ordinary person revealed who they really are. Society does not evaluate behavior in a vacuum. Status enters the room first. Money can purchase time. Representation, image repair, privacy, legal protection, expert language, and public relations. It can transform accusation into misunderstanding, exploitation into strategy, and failure into reinvention. People with fewer resources receive less narrative space. Their story is shorter. Their consequences are faster. Their motives are less interesting. To the public, the villain might not only be the individual who abuses power, it might also be the culture that confuses power with credibility. We often assume successful people must be more disciplined, intelligent, or deserving. Success can reflect those things. It can also reflect timing, access, inheritance, networks, luck, tolerance for risk, willingness to exploit, or proximity to opportunity. Yet once success appears, people begin rewriting the path as evidence of virtue. The winner must have earned everything. The loser must have misunderstood the game. This belief protects the system because it turns outcomes into moral judgments. Wealth becomes proof of value. Poverty becomes proof of failure. Influence becomes proof of insight. Obscurity becomes proof that no one had anything important to say. That is a dangerous mythology because it teaches people to trust position more than behavior. A person can stand at the top of a broken structure and be praised for the height. The structure beneath them remains invisible. Society also creates villains through neglect. Not every harm is committed through active cruelty. Some damage occurs because people simply do not care enough to intervene. A neighborhood lacks resources. A school remains underfunded. A patient is dismissed. A worker is injured. A child is overlooked. A family cannot access help. No one person wakes up and announces a plan to cause suffering. The suffering emerges from delay, bureaucracy, indifference, budget priorities, poor design, and repeated decisions that someone else's urgency can wait. The result may be devastating, even when no dramatic villain appears. This form of harm is difficult to narrate because it has no memorable face. There is no speech, no costume, no final confrontation. There are forms, offices, policies, missed calls, long waits, and responsibilities divided so widely that no one feels fully accountable. The villain becomes procedure. Everyone was doing their job, though no one was responsible for the outcome. That sentence should frighten us. Systems often produce harm precisely because responsibility has been separated into pieces. One person follows policy, another enters data, another approves the budget, another denies the appeal, another explains there is nothing more they can do. Each person performs a limited function. Together, they produce a life-changing result. When responsibility is fragmented, conscience becomes optional. People can participate in harm while believing their individual role was too small to matter. This is how ordinary people become part of extraordinary damage. Not through dramatic evil, through routine. History repeatedly demonstrates that harmful systems depend on administration. Someone schedules, someone records, someone transports, someone signs, someone remains polite. The scale of the outcome can hide behind the smallness of each task. We tend to imagine villains as people, driven by hatred. Many harmful systems are maintained by people, driven by convenience. Convenience is less frightening than hatred, but it may be more common. Convenience says the situation is unfortunate, but complicated. Convenience says this is not the right time. Convenience says the process must be respected. Convenience says someone else will make the difficult decision. Convenience allows harm to continue without requiring anyone to feel cruel. The real villain might be indifference, disguised as neutrality. Neutrality can be valuable when facts are uncertain or conflict requires mediation. But neutrality becomes dangerous when power is radically unequal. Refusing to take a side between the person causing harm and the person absorbing it does not create balance. It often preserves the existing arrangement. The powerful can continue. The vulnerable must continue enduring. Society likes neutrality because it feels civilized. It avoids discomfort. It protects relationships. It allows the observer to appear reasonable. But there are moments when reasonableness becomes cowardice with excellent manners. The challenge is knowing which moment we are in. That requires attention, context, evidence, and moral courage. It requires more than reacting to whoever appears most emotional. People experiencing harm may not present calmly. They may be angry, exhausted, inconsistent, frightened, or unable to explain the situation elegantly. Society often trusts the person who remains composed. Composure can reflect honesty. It can also reflect control. The person with greater power has had more time to prepare the explanation. They may understand the system, the language, the expectations, and the consequences. The harmed person may be speaking from inside the impact. Presentation is not proof. Yet, society regularly rewards the better performance. This returns us to one of the episode's central tensions. We are attracted to confidence, fluency, style, humor, and control. Those qualities help us navigate stories, but they can also interfere with judgment. A convincing person is not automatically a truthful person. An awkward person is not automatically dishonest. A calm institution is not automatically fair. A chaotic accusation is not automatically false. The real villain might be our preference for the version of truth that is easiest to consume. Complex truth is exhausting. It contains contradictions. It may implicate people we like. It may reveal harm without providing an obvious punishment. It may require us to change our own behavior instead of simply condemning someone else's. Simple stories are easier. The hero is good. The villain is bad. The crowd is innocent. The system is neutral. The ending restores order. Real life rarely offers that arrangement. The crowd may have cheered. The system may have rewarded the behavior. The hero may have benefited from the same structure. The villain may have exposed something real before becoming destructive. Order may have been the original problem. This is why society often resists complicated narratives. Complexity threatens identity. It asks us to reconsider what we supported, who we believed, and what we ignored. People do not like learning that their innocence depended on not looking closely, so they attack the messenger, reject the information, or reduce the issue to personal conflict. The new evidence becomes political, biased, divisive, inappropriate, exaggerated, or poorly timed. Poor timing is one of society's favorite arguments against uncomfortable truth. There is never a convenient moment to reveal that the arrangement is harmful. The people benefiting are always busy. The institution is always under pressure. The public is always dealing with something else. The speaker is told to be patient. Patience can become another word for permission. This does not mean every accusation is correct or every disruption is wise. False claims exist. Misunderstandings occur. Evidence can be manipulated. People can weaponize moral language for personal advantage. That is precisely why careful examination matters. But careful examination is different from indefinite avoidance. A process designed to discover truth has a destination. A process designed to protect the status quo can continue forever. The real villain might be the status quo itself. The phrase sounds abstract until we remember that the status quo is simply the collection of arrangements people have become accustomed to. It is not necessarily good. It is merely familiar. Familiar harm can feel safer than uncertain change. People learn how to survive inside the existing problem. They understand the rules. They know which topics to avoid, which people to flatter, which expectations to lower, and which compromises to make. Change threatens those survival strategies. Even people harmed by the system may fear what comes next because the future is less predictable than the pain they already know. This is why unhealthy families repeat patterns, why exploitative workplaces retain employees, why communities tolerate ineffective leadership, why harmful traditions survive after their original purpose has disappeared. Familiarity can become loyalty to the very condition producing distress. The villain may not be the person who refuses change. It may be the fear that makes change feel impossible. Fear influences more decisions than most people admit. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of unemployment, fear of embarrassment, fear of becoming unpopular, fear of admitting we were wrong, fear of discovering that the person we defended did not deserve it. Fear is rarely presented publicly. As fear, it appears as principle, it appears as tradition, it appears as caution, it appears as common sense, it appears as concern for stability. Sometimes those things are sincere, sometimes they are respectable clothing. Placed over panic, society is exceptionally skilled at converting emotional discomfort into moral argument. We do not say change frightens us. We say change is irresponsible. We do not say another group's freedom threatens our identity. We say society is losing its values. We do not say we fear competition. We say standards are declining. The language elevates the feeling. The feeling still drives the decision. Perhaps the real villain is not fear itself, but our refusal to name it. Named fear can be examined. Unnamed fear governs from the shadows. Once, fear becomes public policy, family tradition, workplace culture, or social expectation. People may forget it began as an emotion. It becomes the way things are done, and anyone challenging it appears dangerous. The challenger becomes the villain because they force the hidden fear into view. This pattern helps explain why societies often punish truth-tellers before eventually celebrating them. The truth-teller interrupts emotional comfort. They expose contradiction. They force people to choose between identity and evidence. At first, that feels like aggression. Later, after the culture changes, the same message is remembered as courage. The delay between rejection and recognition can last years, decades, or generations. That delay has consequences. People continue being harmed, while society decides whether the truth was delivered politely enough. Politeness is valuable. It allows people to remain in conversation. But politeness can also become a standard imposed, more heavily on those with less power. The harmed person is expected to remain calm. The powerful person is permitted. Complexity, the protests must be convenient. The criticism must be respectful. The truth must not interfere with anyone's afternoon. When civility becomes more important than the conditions being criticized. Civility becomes protection for the condition. The real villain might be our obsession with appearing good rather than becoming better. Appearing good requires language. Becoming better requires cost. An institution can publish values without changing incentives. A person can post support without changing behavior. A company can celebrate inclusion without sharing authority. A community can praise compassion while opposing every policy that would require resources. Symbolic goodness is attractive because it provides a moral identity at a discount. We can feel aligned with a solution without surrendering anything. Real change usually asks for time, money, attention, status, convenience, or control. It may require listening without being centered. It may require apologizing without explaining. It may require losing an advantage we never considered unfair because we inherited it. Quietly, that is where enthusiasm often declines. People enjoy change as an idea. They become less excited when change enters the calendar, the budget, the neighborhood. the workplace, or the family. The real villain might be hypocrisy, but hypocrisy is often too simple a word. Many people genuinely believe their stated values. The contradiction appears because values compete with comfort. A person may believe in fairness until fairness threatens an advantage. They may believe in honesty until honesty threatens a relationship. They may believe in accountability until the person being held accountable is someone they love. They may believe in forgiveness until the harm is personal. The belief was not necessarily false, it was untested. Values are easiest to announce before they become expensive. The moment of cost reveals hierarchy. It shows which value survives when two cannot occupy the same decision. Society does not always fail because it has no principles. Sometimes it fails because comfort ranks above them. Comfort is a quiet force. It does not make speeches. It does not break windows. It simply encourages everyone to postpone the difficult action until someone else accepts the burden. Comfort tells the witness not to get involved. Comfort tells the manager the problem can wait. Comfort tells the voter the issue is too complicated. Comfort tells the family to keep the peace. Comfort tells the artist not to offend the audience. Comfort tells the audience not to examine what the entertainment is rewarding. Comfort preserves the present. Whether the present deserves preservation becomes a separate question. This brings us back to the audience. We are not standing outside society observing its failures from a safe distance. We are participating in its incentives. Our attention has value. Our purchases have value. Our silence has value. Our outrage has value. Our willingness to keep watching has value. Every system studies what people reward. Entertainment studies what we finish. Platforms study what we share. Politicians study what frightens us. Companies study what we tolerate. Public figures study what we forgive. If the most cruel, divisive, manipulative, or outrageous behavior consistently receives the greatest attention, the system learns a lesson. It does not learn that we disapprove. It learns that we will watch. Attention is not morally neutral in an attention economy. It is currency. This creates one of the strangest contradictions of modern culture. People may spend hours consuming content about someone they claim should disappear. They repeat the name, share the clip, debate the motive, and distribute every new development. The opposition becomes promotion. The villain remains visible because hatred is still engagement. This does not mean people should ignore genuine danger. Silence can protect wrongdoing. The challenge is distinguishing useful exposure from compulsive participation. Does sharing this information help someone? Does it clarify the issue? Does it create accountability? Or does it merely extend the spectacle? The answer may differ from case to case. The question should still be asked. Society often behaves as though attention is free because no money leaves the hand. But attention costs time, emotion, focus, and cultural space. Every hour devoted to the net. The artist villain is an hour not devoted to quieter problems. Solutions, artists, thinkers, organizers, caregivers, teachers, or neighbors doing constructive work. Destruction dominates. Because construction is less theatrical, the person breaking the window becomes more visible than the person repairing the building. The person making the outrageous statement becomes more visible than the person developing the practical solution. The person creating fear becomes more visible than the person sustaining trust. This imbalance can make society appear more hopeless than it is. Goodness is often repetitive, local, and quiet. It happens in routines. Someone returns the call. Someone keeps the promise. Someone notices the person being excluded. Someone tells the truth in a room where lying would be easier. Someone changes a policy. Someone gives credit. Someone stays patient. These actions rarely trend. They still hold society together. Perhaps one reason villain stories dominate is that maintenance does not look heroic. Preventing harm produces no dramatic footage. A bridge that does not collapse receives little attention. A conflict resolved privately never becomes contempt. A child supported early may never become a crisis. Success often looks like nothing happened. Failure announces itself. This can distort public priorities. Resources flow toward visible disaster, while prevention remains underfunded. People respond once the problem becomes dramatic enough to justify attention. The villain may be crisis culture itself, a habit of waiting until harm becomes spectacular before deciding it matters. By then, the intervention costs more. The damage is deeper. The choices are worse. The public asks how the situation became so severe, even though smaller warnings were present for years. Those warnings were not dramatic enough. We ignored the whisper and demanded the explosion. This is not merely an institutional problem. Individuals do it too. We ignore fatigue until illness arrives. We ignore resentment until the relationship collapses. We ignore debt until the emergency. We ignore grief until the body begins carrying it. Human beings are often more responsive to pain than prevention. The villain becomes visible only after the pattern has matured. Then we describe the outcome as sudden. Maybe the real villain is not one person, one system, one emotion, or one cultural habit. Maybe it is the combination. Fear creates the demand. Power creates the opportunity. Silence creates protection. Attention creates reward. Comfort delays change. Distance reduces empathy. Repetition creates normality. By the time the villain appears, fully formed society may have participated in every stage of the construction. That does not erase individual responsibility. The person still made decisions. They still crossed boundaries, caused harm, and pursued power. But focusing only on the individual can prevent us from seeing the assembly line. Who taught the behavior? Who rewarded it? Who defended it? Who benefited? Who knew? Who remained silent? Who loved? Who paid? Who watched? Those questions widen the frame without dissolving accountability. They remind us that responsibility can be shared without becoming equal. The person who commits harm carries a different responsibility than the person who looked away. The person who designed the system carries a different responsibility than the person trapped within it. But difference does not mean absence. Everyone may not be guilty of the same thing. Everyone may still be part of the story. This is where the word society becomes dangerous if used too vaguely. Society can become another faceless villain, allowing individuals to avoid responsibility. People say society did this, culture did that, the system failed, the internet decided. Those statements may be true, but they can also hide the verbs. A person approved the policy. A person made the joke. A person declined the request. A person chose not to intervene. A person clicked. Share.systems act through people. Culture survives through repetition. Society is not somewhere else. That may be the most uncomfortable realization. In the entire discussion, we are all capable of becoming the crowd. We are all capable of protecting the familiar. We are all capable of enjoying punishment more than repair. We are all capable of giving our favorite person more context than our least favorite person. We are all capable of confusing our perspective with reality. The point is not to declare everyone a villain. That would be another form of simplification. The point is to recognize capacity. Human beings do not divide neatly into those who create harm and those who never could. Circumstances matter. Incentives matter. Fear matters. Group approval matters. Power matters. The same person may act courageously in one situation and remain silent in another. Character is real, but character is tested through context. People often believe they would have resisted the harmful crowd in another era. They imagine themselves challenging the ruler, protecting the outsider, exposing the institution, or refusing the order. Perhaps they would have, but history is easier to judge after the social cost has disappeared. The better question is not what we believe we would have done then. It is what we are willing to do now when the outcome is uncertain. The group disagrees. The person being defended is unpopular. And courage may actually cost something. That question does not produce an easy answer. It produces attention. Maybe that is what this segment is asking. For not guilt, not cynicism, and not the collapse of all moral distinction. Attention, attention to what we reward, attention to what we excuse, attention to which people receive complexity, attention to which suffering becomes spectacle, attention to the distance between what we claim to value and what our behavior sustains. The real villain might be society. The real villain might be the system. The real villain might be fear, indifference, comfort, spectacle, power, or silence. Or the real villain might be the moment each of us decides our individual contribution is too small to matter. Because that is how large things are built, quietly, collectively, one reasonable decision at a time. So here we are. We began with what seemed like a fairly innocent question. Why do we root for the bad guy? Somehow, that question led us through psychology, history, storytelling, trauma, power, accountability, identity, culture, institutions, public humiliation, fear, ambition, loyalty, comfort, and the complicated human habit of seeing ourselves as innocent observers inside systems we are actively helping to maintain. That is the thing about a useful question. It rarely stays where you put it. You begin by examining a fictional villain and eventually discover that the character was only an entrance. The real subject was always human nature, including our attraction to confidence, our fascination with rule-breaking, our desire to understand pain, our willingness to forgive charisma more quickly than awkwardness, and our tendency to protect the people who entertain us, represent us, resemble us, or give language to emotions we do not know how to express ourselves. None of that means we are secretly terrible people. It means we are unfinished people whose judgment is influenced by emotion, familiarity, storytelling, fear, memory, desire, and the quality of the presentation. We do not experience the world as neutral machines, calmly processing evidence. We experience it as human beings carrying entire personal histories into every room. We do not simply watch the story. We arrive inside it carrying our childhoods, disappointments, the rules we were forced to follow, the rules we wish we had broken, the people who underestimated us, every apology we never received, every argument we replayed, every moment we felt invisible, and every fantasy in which we finally became powerful enough that no one could dismiss us again. Then the villain walks onto the screen and says something familiar. It may not be something good, but it is something familiar. Perhaps they refuse to beg, decline to accept humiliation quietly, or say the uncomfortable truth before the hero has found the courage to say it. Perhaps they are completely wrong about what should happen next, yet painfully accurate about what has already happened. In that small moment of recognition, the audience leans forward. That leaning forward is not a confession of guilt. It is an act of identification. We recognize the emotion, and then the story asks what we are willing to tolerate because of it. That may be the real psychological test running underneath all of this. The question is not simply whether we understand the villain, but what happens after understanding arrives. Do we remain capable of judgment? Can we maintain empathy without surrendering standards? Can we acknowledge pain without allowing pain to become a permanent permit? Can we believe someone is human without pretending everything they do is acceptable? Can we recognize brilliance without mistaking brilliance for goodness? Admire strength without celebrating domination, and appreciate rebellion while still asking what the rebellion intends to build? These are difficult questions because our minds enjoy categories such as good person, bad person, hero, villain, victim, offender, correct side, and wrong side. Categories save time, but they also hide information. A person can be generous and selfish, brave and frightened, loving and controlling, honest in one room and deeply dishonest in another. Someone can be wounded without being innocent, cause harm without being beyond repair, speak beautifully about freedom while denying freedom to everyone around them, make extraordinary art and still behave terribly, or make an unforgivable decision. After years of doing admirable things, human beings do not become contradictions. We begin as contradictions, and the work is learning which part of us receives authority. That may be where the hero and the villain actually separate. The difference is not found in the presence of anger, fear, ambition, pain, confidence, grief, jealousy, or the desire to be recognized, because those emotions belong to nearly everyone. The difference appears in what a person decides those emotions entitle them to do. Does pain become understanding, or does it become permission to cause pain? Does fear become preparation, or does it become control? Does ambition become creation, or does it become exploitation? Does confidence create room for other people, or does it require everyone else to become smaller? Does intelligence become service, or does it become manipulation? Does rebellion produce freedom, or does it simply replace the old authority with a new face? That line is not always dramatic. Most of the time, it appears inside small decisions, such as whether to tell the truth when the lie would work, give credit when no one would notice if we kept it, apologize without attaching a defense, stop speaking long enough to understand what someone else is trying to say, use influence to open a door instead of guarding it, repair the harm privately, rather than performing regret publicly, or walk away from a profitable arrangement, because the cost is being paid by someone with less power. The world may celebrate the dramatic act, but character is usually built through repetition, through quiet and unrecorded decisions, made before an audience arrives. that thought matters deeply to what we are building here. At WDMATION Media, we are not attempting to construct a creative business by pretending that business is separate from the human being operating it. The music, podcast, visuals, stories, strategy, licensing, branding, audience, family, future, and the person sitting alone in the studio trying to decide what the next move should be are all connected. Every part affects the others. There is no clean separation between the creator and the life the creator is living. A song may begin as a business asset and become an emotional document. A podcast episode may begin as content and become a conversation that changes the person recording it. A brand may begin as a logo and eventually become a record of values. A company may begin as a legal structure and slowly become a public expression of what its owner believes deserves to exist in the world. That is why this journey cannot be reduced to numbers, even though the numbers matter. Streams, followers, licensing opportunities, revenue, ownership, metadata, registration, contracts, and distribution all matter. The business side is not an embarrassment attached to the art. It is the structure that gives the art a chance to survive beyond the moment of creation. But structure without purpose becomes another machine. The goal cannot be growth at any cost. The goal is growth that leaves the human being intact. Growth that supports the family instead of consuming it. And growth that allows the parent, partner, spouse, creative business owner, friend, and human being to remain present rather than becoming a supporting character inside that. Ambition, it should be growth that teaches the children that imagination and responsibility do not have to be enemies. Growth that proves art can be bold without becoming careless, and growth that allows a person to prepare for the future without abandoning the people standing beside them in the present. That balance is difficult. Anyone suggesting otherwise is either selling something or has never attempted it. To be a creative business owner is to live in several timelines at once. You are thinking about what must be completed today, what must be released next month, what may create income next year, and what may still hold value 10 years from now. You are building the catalog while maintaining the household, developing the brand while trying to remain available as a parent, pursuing opportunity while attempting not to make every conversation sound like an opportunity, and creating a future, while still being responsible for the dishes, appointments, bills, relationships, disappointments, and emotional weather of the home. There is something almost absurd about it. One moment you're making decisions about intellectual property, and the next someone needs help finding a charger. One moment you're considering the long-term value of a music catalog, and the next the dog needs to go outside. One moment you are designing an empire, and the next you are reminded that every empire still requires someone to take the trash out. That is not a distraction from the work. That is the work. The human life surrounding the business is not an obstacle to achievement. It is the environment that gives achievement meaning. What is the point of building something impressive if the people closest to us experience only the absence required to build it? What is the point of creating freedom through business if the process turns the creator into a prisoner of constant production? What is the point of owning the catalog if the catalog eventually owns every waking hour? Those are not arguments against ambition. They are arguments for conscious ambition. Ambition should know what it serves. Without that answer, expansion becomes reflexive, producing more releases, more content, more platforms, more visibility, more opportunities, and more proof that the machine is moving. Motion can feel like purpose, but they are not always. The Sam Nation Media is trying to become something larger than a collection of releases. It is an attempt to build an independent creative ecosystem where music, visual identity, storytelling, technology, business, and personal philosophy support one another. The independence matters. Not because independence means refusing help or performing every task alone forever, but because it means retaining enough ownership, understanding, and authority to avoid becoming a guest inside your own creation. It means learning the systems, registering the work, understanding the rights, protecting the catalog, building relationships without surrendering identity, using technology without allowing technology to replace intention, and creating at scale without making the work feel disposable. That is a delicate line to walk. The future offers extraordinary tools. A single creator can now produce music, design visuals, build campaigns, record podcasts, distribute internationally, maintain websites, communicate with industry professionals, and operate a media company from one connected workspace. That is remarkable, but it is also dangerous. The same tools that expand possibility can expand pressure. When a person can do nearly everything, it becomes difficult to accept that they should not do everything at once. Capability creates temptation. The software never becomes tired. The platform always accepts another upload. The analytics always provide another number to study. And the algorithm always suggests that consistency requires one more post. The future can begin resembling an infinite list of things a human being should have completed yesterday. That is where technology requires philosophy. We need a reason to use the tool, a boundary around the tool, and a standard for what the tool should never be allowed to decide. Artificial intelligence can assist with language, organization, ideation, production, analysis, and design. It can accelerate work that once required entire teams. However, acceleration does not answer the question of direction. Fast toward what? Efficient for whom? Productive according to which values? The future is not automatically humane simply because it is advanced. The people building it must insist on humanity. That means leaving room for imperfection, instinct, and the strange. An idea that does not perform well immediately but still deserves to exist. It means leaving room for rest that does not need to be justified as preparation for more labor. For family members who may not understand every detail of the mission but are still living beside it, and for the creator to change their mind. The business should evolve with the person. It should not trap the person inside an identity created several years earlier. A brand can become another kind of villain when it demands a permanent performance. The audience expects the same tone. The platform expects the same format. The industry expects a recognizable product, and the creator begins repeating what worked because experimentation threatens the pattern. Soon, the brand that was designed to express freedom becomes a set of instructions limiting it. That is why WDM Nation Media must remain broad enough to grow. Music can become storytelling. Storytelling can become conversation. Conversation can become education. Education can become community. Community can create opportunity. Opportunity can produce revenue, and revenue can fund more experimentation. That is an ecosystem, not a straight line. The work feeds itself, but it should also feed the life around it. The long-term goal is not simply to be seen. Visibility is useful, but visibility without connection is temporary. The goal is to create work with enough identity that people recognize the world it comes from. A think Tim record should feel connected to a think Tim idea. A Willa May observation should feel as though it belongs inside the larger philosophy. A Why Make Music episode should give the listener something more than promotion. It should offer perspective. The audience should leave with a new question, phrase, idea, or way of looking at something they believed they already understood. That may be one of the clearest differences between content and contribution. Content occupies time, while contribution changes something. Perhaps only slightly, and perhaps only for one person. But something moves. This episode asks us to move beyond the easiest version of moral judgment. It asks us to admit that villains can be compelling without being correct. Heroes can be admirable without being complete. Society can produce harm without every participant consciously choosing cruelty. An explanation can be true without becoming an excuse. Accountability can be necessary without requiring humiliation. And compassion can remain present without taking control of the entire verdict. It also asks us to examine our own position, not from guilt, because guilt is often a short-lived emotion centered on the person feeling it, but from responsibility. Responsibility asks what happens next. What will we reward? What will we refuse to normalize? What behavior will we stop calling brilliance simply because it produces results? What type of success are we actually trying to build? What will our children learn by watching how we pursue it? Will they learn that creation requires self-destruction? That love receives whatever energy remains after ambition is finished? Or that winning excuses cruelty? Or will they see that discipline can coexist with kindness? Ownership can coexist with partnership. Boldness can coexist with reflection. And a person can take their vision seriously without treating everyone else's needs as interference. Those questions are not answered through one dramatic choice. They are answered through atmosphere, through the tone of the home, whether promises are kept, whether work is allowed to stop, whether success produces generosity or only greater appetite, and whether the people closest to the creator feel included. In the future being built, the future is always presented as something waiting ahead of us. In reality, we are already constructing it. Every routine is a vote. Every habit is a design decision. Every piece of work teaches the audience what to expect. Every business practice teaches collaborators how they will be treated. Every family decision teaches the household what matters most. And every compromise reveals which value currently ranks highest. That can sound heavy, but it does not have to become paralyzing. Human beings require room to fail. The goal is not flawless balance, because balance is not a permanent condition. It is an ongoing correction. Some weeks the business will require more, and some days the family will require everything. Sometimes the creative work will flow easily, while at other times a single paragraph will require an unreasonable amount of energy. Sometimes we will handle everything with patience, and sometimes we will become the difficult person in the room. The question is not whether we will ever drift. We will. The question is whether we are willing to notice, adjust, apologize, repair, and continue. That willingness may be the most realistic form of goodness available to us. It is not purity, it is responsiveness. The villain cannot admit they have become the problem because their identity depends on always being justified. The growing human being can stop and acknowledge that something is not working, that they were wrong, caused harm, became too focused, stopped listening, confused movement with progress, defended something because it belonged to them, or gave themselves context while giving someone else a label. That recognition does not make a person weak. It makes change possible. Perhaps that is William May's final psychoanalysis of the matter. We all contain the materials for heroism and villainy, fear and ambition, tenderness and ego, the willingness to protect and the temptation to dominate, the instinct to create and the impulse to destroy what we cannot control, the desire to be understood and the refusal to understand someone else. These forces are not waiting inside separate categories of people. They are negotiating inside each of us every day, most of the time without dramatic music. We should be suspicious of any philosophy that tells us evil belongs entirely to someone else. That idea feels wonderful, but it also prevents self-examination. At the same time, we should be suspicious of any philosophy that makes everyone equally responsible for every harm. Power matters, choice matters, intention matters, and access matters. The person causing harm is not identical to the person attempting to survive it. Complexity should sharpen responsibility, not dissolve it. The goal is not to become so sophisticated that we lose the ability to say something is wrong. The goal is to understand enough to respond wisely, to know when compassion is necessary and when distance is necessary, when forgiveness may help and when forgiveness is being demanded by someone who has not changed, when a relationship can be repaired and when the healthiest act is leaving, when a person needs support and when a person needs consequences, when the system needs reform instead of another statement, when the audience should look away and when the audience must refuse. To look away, there is no single answer that fits every story. That is why discernment matters. Discernment is slower than outrage, less glamorous than certainty, and more demanding than choosing a side and repeating whatever that side has already decided. However, discernment is how we remain human while facing behavior that tempts us to abandon humanity. That may be the line. WDM Nation Media is trying to walk in everything it creates. We want to be bold without becoming careless, independent without becoming isolated, productive without becoming mechanical, ambitious without becoming consumed, future-facing without becoming detached from the present, entertaining without becoming empty, intelligent without becoming inaccessible, and emotionally honest without turning every wound into public theatre. We want the work to have an edge, but an edge should cut through confusion rather than simply cut people. We want to create music that moves, stories that remain, conversations that challenge, visuals that build a world, business structures that protect the work, relationships that open possibilities, and a catalogue capable of outliving the immediate moment. Somewhere inside all of that, we are still trying to remain a creative business. Owner, parent, partner, spouse, friend, neighbor, and human being with limits, fears, responsibilities, and a future that cannot be measured entirely through analytics. Perhaps success is not proving that one person can do everything. Perhaps success is building something meaningful without losing the ability to recognize what already matters. That does not require shrinking the dream. It requires making the dream large enough to include a life, a real life rather than merely the polished version, an unfinished life with interruptions and doubt, where progress and fatigue occasionally sit beside each other, and where the future is being built by a person who is still learning how to live in the present. After all this talk of villains, heroes, systems, audiences, trauma, power, and responsibility, perhaps we do not need a final verdict. Perhaps we need a final practice. Pay attention to the story being told, to who receives complete humanity inside it, to the people being reduced to symbols, to the behavior hidden beneath charm, to the truth hidden beneath an uncomfortable delivery, to what your anger is trying to protect, to what your admiration is encouraging you to ignore, and to the future you are building while you are busy describing the future you want. When you discover that you have been wrong, do not waste too much time defending the person you were before the new information arrived. Use the information, adjust, and grow. That is not defeat. That is the work. Maybe there are no permanent heroes, and perhaps no one exists entirely outside the possibility of becoming harmful. Maybe heroism is simply the repeated decision to remain responsible for what we are becoming. Perhaps the most dangerous. Villain is the version of ourselves that no longer believes it needs to change. This has been Why Make Music, AW. DM Nation Media Presentation. I am Willa May, reminding you that the future is not something that happens to us. It is something we practice becoming. Take care of the work, take care of the people, and take care of the human being responsible for both peace and be wild.
Have you ever felt they're calling you in? A choice, a decision. Did you question it or just give in? No rewrite, no revision. Not proud of the path I chose, but that's the cost of living, I suppose. Yeah, I suppose. My future isn't clear. Watching my past in the mirror. To cleanse it all, I might just cut off my hair. To my knees I fall, and I ask if the devil may care. Do you even care? If I check it off, doesn't mean it's complete. Got the linen so soft, but I'm restless underneath. Is the hustle gone when I lay down? I can't strategize in my sleep. I just play back now. Downtime goes the plans, now I'm working harder. Everything I touch, I still carry farther. All that I build, I deal with these hands. These hands, all these plans. Under different circumstances, we could highlight all the chances, but wasted time lives run free in my mind. I gotta pull myself up, no one else is coming. Half full enough when the world keeps running. Keep running, don't stop now. My future isn't clear. Watching my past in the mirror. To cleanse it all, I might just cut off my hair.